Brilliant. We're good to go, guys. So, first of all, Happy New Year's to everyone. I hope your year has started as powerfully as mine. I must say, I think this is the perfect time to talk about cosmic law, especially considering that this is a time where we look at rebirth, we look at reassessing our own personal cycles. We try and decide why it is we keep hitting our heads, why it is that we keep making these mistakes. And I promise you, I am not exempt from that in any way. My stubbornness goes so deep. So this is the perfect time to open up. And if you're a little bit confused about what we're going to be talking about, I'm going to throw such a radical theory out there immediately. And this theory is essentially that the ancient Egyptians, the Hermetics, the Rosicrucians, the Gnostic Christians, we're talking thousands and thousands of years ago, that they all had one thing in common. And that was that they believed there was this thing called universal law, which was a set of laws that were intertwined absolutely beautifully, that were immutable. In other words, absolutely unchangeable. And that unless you understood these universal laws, you would live completely victimized to reality. So that's the overview of what it is that we're actually going to try and consider here. And this is a very, very difficult subject because it triggers us in a lot of ways. So we essentially are not going to be talking about the laws just yet. We are going to be having this conversation about this, whether it is even possible that this could be real. Now, unfortunately, the word law is not a very good translation of what the original text said, and it brings a few semantic problems across. And what I mean by that is when I think of law, I've got such a strong rebellious side. I'm like, don't tell me what to do. That's the first thing that comes up in me. And law, we have very much an abridged version when we think of humanity and we think of courts. And what comes up in our minds semantically when we think about law is almost a list of what not to do. It almost feels like a no-go zone. And that is not at all what cosmic law is. So to begin this journey, the idea would be that if we can wrap our heads around it, and of course we are here to experimentally listen to what is being said and decide whether, when we take this fine wine within our palate, whether we're going to spit it out or not, whether this is a concept that is going to become one of the most empowering things that we could ever do, or whether this literally is going to sour our perception of what's being said. And the only way that we can do that is to just suspend anything that we think we know for a short while. To take on the fact that there might be cosmic laws is a massive undertaking, because there's a first few aspects to this that are triggering. The first is that cosmic law suggests that there are a perfect set of immutable, unwielding, non-negotiable, perfectly balanced, disciplined, harmonious laws that dance together so perfectly that they only appear from someone who is disconnected to the greater reality, that they only appear to be harsh, or appear to be cold in some way, or appear to be some form of punishment. This would only be to the unwizened counsel, so to speak. So if there is such a thing, what we are actually going to unpack is that there is a perfect formula, and that this formula has a set of rules that has been given to us through multiple religions and through multiple channels, and that if we begin to embrace and understand these rules, we essentially realize that cosmic law is not something that shuts us down. It means freedom for all. So if you can imagine a being, a divine creature, I can't even wrap my head around it, some sort of a purpose-driven prime creator that has such an intelligence that it has intertwined a set of laws that are so perfect that every single being would get everything they ever really wanted from a higher perspective. In other words, when you finally figure out what it is you truly desired, not these things that we attempt that leave us feeling dry, we would discover that cosmic law has been leading us there all along. It's almost like saying it's a way for all beings to dance in their fullest expression without a single being being held back through this divine evolution that is so enormous that we almost can't wrap our heads quite around what the possibility of it would be. But essentially, to embrace cosmic law would mean to get to a point where your will becomes what you perceive as God's will, or God's will and your will become one in their own, which is quite an extraordinary thing. So where do we begin? We begin with what we know. And what we do know is that there are definitely sets of laws. I mean, how do we know that? Because I'm holding a glass in my hand. And if I try and put the glass through the table, I can't do it. So what we become very aware of is that there is, without a doubt, physical laws. Now, cosmic law suggests that there are seen and unseen laws, and that the universe is just a perfect balance of knowing what those unseen laws are and knowing what the seen laws are. And essentially, you could even playfully call it that that's what the great magicians were not people that bent the law, were people that understood it so perfectly that they could dance between it. As Aldous Huxley said, gently, gently, my child, you could dance upon the thrones of reality. So we've got this idea that we are probably willing to accept before we really bend our minds, that, like, for instance, there are immutable, I mean, physics, laws of physics are immutable. There's probably a part of us that will go, well, are they? Like, I've heard that thousands of years ago there was, but essentially we know that the laws of physics are immutable. They are unwielding, they are unbreakable, they do not care about your opinion about them. Essentially, they exist. And what is so interesting is if we look at where the unseen laws came from. Now, many of you did the last talk that I did, so I'm not going to repeat any of that stuff, but it's quite fascinating to realize that the schools of Alexandria and the great mystery schools of Egypt actually influenced far more than you could comprehend until you study it. Modern Greek, the modern Greek, the modern Babylonian, the way it actually dispersed. And essentially what I mean by this in simplicity, because we spoke about this for an hour last time, was that there were these mystery schools in Egypt that people like Pythagoras, that people like Isaac Newton, that right across were influenced by, and these mystery schools protected cosmic law. And what they did was essentially you had to be worthwhile. And the way you had to be worthwhile, nowadays we need what you would call an intelligence, or you would need a high IQ. They needed to be fully committed to the divine or the God within them, as much as they were committed to the out. In other words, they had to be profound individuals to be given all these cosmic laws. And what's quite interesting to note, in case we want to throw these cosmic laws that they gave us away and discount perhaps their validity, is to consider that nearly every science that we have today came from the same mystery schools. Many of you in your studies will know it as hermetics. Many of you will know that medicine as we know it today, people like Pythagoras, people like Socrates, people like, they were all outspoken hermeticists. And hermetics were essentially a set of principles given to us by the ancient Egyptians. And that birthed into, for instance, I cannot think of his name right now, but for instance, that birthed into modern medicine, that birthed into chemistry, etc., etc. Now, of course, what also came from there was astronomy. And what I'm going to use is I'm going to use astronomy as a little bit of a prime example of how we've lost the unseen and we are obsessed with the seen. I'm not sure how many people are aware of this, but astronomy and astrology were one in their own. In other words, the fact that they were observing where planets were, and the fact that there were planets out there, but the fact that they were influencing you at the same time were a single subject. They were never separate. It was only when the Hermetic mystery schools started to go underground, it began to split into the Gnostics, the Rosicrucians, the Masons. It is only at that stage that it became hidden information, and astrology and astronomy split. And therefore, there's an example of, now it doesn't matter if you don't believe in astrology, but there's an example of how the original wisdom that was given to us had seen and unseen laws. We see the same thing if you want to talk about chemistry. If you look at chemistry, they were originally called alchemists. And what an alchemist was, that was someone that was finding the perfect laws and formulas, not just within physical objects, but within the ether and the ethereal, in other words, seen and unseen laws. And quite extraordinary, as we see with the godfather of chemistry being Paracelsus, we see what started to happen when, like, for instance, when he discovered sulfur, then we as humanity became quite obsessed with the physical laws that we were discovering. But up until that stage already, I need you to understand that these masters who were scientists, Isaac Newton, I can give you this whole list of people that were Hermeticists. They believed, like the picture that we've used, that the entire universe was this balance of physical and non-physical laws. And if you shoot a little bit ahead, if you look at where chemistry is nowadays, alchemy is almost known as a myth. It seems like there's no such thing as anymore, but of course, chemistry has advanced enormously. And the state of the world that we're in today is that we all are becoming reasonable experts on what the physical laws of the universe are, turning us more mechanistic, turning us more materialistic, turning us more based on what we feel and see around us. And antiquity's laws have basically begun to dissolve. And that has left us in a frightful situation indeed. How interesting. The way that prayer originally existed as well through the religions of antiquity is prayer, if you look at how it is represented in the original texts, even in some of the Hebrew and Bible texts, biblical texts, is you notice that prayer essentially was the calling out, the acknowledgement that you were part of this great purpose pattern of perfect moving processes that all work to some form of evolution that was just beyond our grasp, that we were a piece of the whole. And how could we ever doubt the whole that we were a piece of? And prayer was the humbling of oneself, asking never to change what essentially was happening, but asking for the wisdom to be bestowed upon you, to understand and to have the strength to go with what it is that you knew a higher part of you had been choosing. Wow, like no victimization there. And there is a lot of examples. If you're a bit of an old scroll scholar, a really good one to look into is Solomon. I mean, if you look at Solomon, where, however they mean it in the text, when God essentially asked Solomon what he wanted, and I'm making this really quick, most of you know the story, but essentially he could have had anything and he chose wisdom. And if you look at the translation of the word wisdom, you notice that wisdom and law are very interchangeable. But basically he asked for wisdom because Solomon knew that to have the wisdom of understanding how these cosmic laws were actually God's will in action, and that there was no greater perfection to ever have existed, and that it would take us the rest of our eternal lives to gradually become present with this magnificent thing that is we are part of. So Solomon literally asked for wisdom, and prayer was very much that. Prayer was asking, St. Thomas Aquinas, not my will, not my will, not my will, thy will be done. Or it was this asking for the strength, give me the strength to be able to do what I need to do. And why this is really important is I want you to understand that most of our mystery schools did not exist in any way to try and become, I guess what you could say, in denial about what is fact and what is reality. An example is you are born and you will grow older and you will die, and there will be no exception. And some people will understand why that is perfect. Some people will become involved in a magnificent purpose pattern during that period, and some won't. But those laws are immutable. It feels cold in the beginning. And why this is important conversation is simply because we begin to understand that a set of rules or values or a religion that does not truly prepare you for what is going to unfold, whether you're in denial or not, is completely useless. I mean, this is really a far jump here, but if you look at the mythology of the Norse, what a reality of their lives was that they were probably going to die in combat. And their mythology was so powerful that they were able to fully embrace that. Now, that is a useful mythology. Now, I know that sounds very intense, but they were able to embrace what was most likely going to happen to them. We live in an era where most of us have our deaths coming around the corner, approaching us. The fact that we're going to lose family members, the fact that life is essentially a really, really difficult, challenging, magnificent unfolding of some cosmic divine purpose pattern. But what does that mean? Is, are we prepared? And do what we believe, does it help us embrace the realities of what these cosmic laws sometimes allow to unfold? So it's a huge subject, of course, as you can feel as we approach it. And why this prayer thing is such an interesting thing is what's happened today. The majority of religions were actually born on an understanding to build, and when I say mythology, I don't mean it's not true, but a mythology that could really help you embrace that which is within you. What purpose is this? And what are these laws unfolding? And how can I learn to dance with them and not become an absolute victim to the circumstance? So through prayer, what has changed is that the religions began to negotiate with cosmic law. Now, this is where things get interesting. Religions began to negotiate with cosmic law. An example is a certain religion would say, well, that is true. You shouldn't kill people, or you shouldn't do this, or etc., whatever they might have perceived the laws are. But we have a certain way that we can get around that, or if you just do this, or if you just do that, or only the people on this side of the fence are going to be exempt of cosmic law. And of course, because we are so disconnected to how perfect the fact that we are birthed and that we will die, the fact we are so disconnected for the glory of what it is that it actually is to be a human being over eons. We're just not aware of it yet. We are looking for a way out all the time. So I'm not saying religions are incorrect. I want us to just acknowledge that religions began to negotiate with cosmic law. And in that, what essentially happened over 3, 4, 5,000 years is the average person not being taught about cosmic law and the fact that there is essentially a perfect reality that is constantly reacting to you constantly, to your own process of growth, to how fast you want to grow, to how deep your ethos goes. And because we don't know that, what prayer is essentially today is us not on our knees asking for wisdom and strength to lean into what we know is perfect, even if we cannot now see it yet. Prayer is essentially us begging for things to be different, which does not leave us in a powerful place whatsoever. To immediately ask for things to be different is first of all to take responsibility away from the fact that you have somehow been part of that purpose pattern in creation. But secondly, it is to say that there could be mistakes and that this is not the most perfect mechanism ever created. So it leaves you in a very precarious situation when you go to worship. Are you worshiping the absolute perfection of something unfolding, that which each year gives you a little bit more of a glimpse, and as you deepen your own journey, gives you a little bit of a deeper glimpse just to how big what's going on is, how exciting and how much of a part of it you are. It just makes you really question what it is that you would consider prayer or worship. And what that brings us to with is the word faith. And what's extraordinary about the word faith is people say, just have faith. Now, this conversation that we're about to dive into further into about the cosmic law, a lot of people will tell you that the cosmic laws work even more powerfully for you if you actually essentially have faith. Now, religions have known this for thousands of years. But now, when we speak of faith, the first thing that happens to a person is they think of, it means I must just believe something and it'll happen. Now, essentially, that's silly, and I'll tell you why. I have faith in certain friends. Why do I have faith in those friends? Well, the only reason I have faith in those friends, the friends that I have the deepest faith in, are the ones that have shown up for me the most times, are the ones that I've had a theory about. And in that theory, they have proven me correct countless times. Is that not true? If you say, I have faith in you, are you telling me that your strength of faith is going to be based on the depth of your exploration of that faith? If you, for instance, know a cosmic law, one of the great ones being cause and effect, which the Eastern individuals call karma, the Hermetics called cause and effect, there is an example. If you constantly prove to yourself that what you put in, you get out, and that everything is reflecting and responding to you, and I'm only using this law because it's one of the few ones we've kept in the modern time. There are powerful, mind-blowing ones that just create illumination like you cannot believe, but let's use that one. There's an example. Now, I have faith, absolute faith in the perfection of this divine system's cause and effect. You know why? Because I know that I can screw my life up in 7 days, and I also know I can change my life in 7 days. I have such faith in this law because it has responded to me that many times. That's what faith really is. Faith is not meant to be just placed. Faith is the exuberance of your divine spirit's overwhelming power placed in the best place that you can think of. And as you direct it, that grows. So once you start to go deeper into cosmic law and it starts responding to you, you will understand faith on the deepest level. But a simplicity of this is if you're dealing with something very difficult in your life and you're willing to accept that maybe something's not wrong, and you're willing to go onto your hands and knees and ask for the strength and the wisdom like Solomon to understand what it is that you must bear, and that's not to create a martyr, it could be to have the strength of what you should do. It totally changes your relationship, because if there is some sort of response and you find a strength you've never had, you will now have faith in prayer. I have a deep faith in prayer. And people say to me, well, that's so ridiculous. How can you have faith in something that doesn't work? I've got faith in it because it works. If prayer doesn't work for you, it's because maybe you have the modern context of we pray for things. How can you, without understanding what the universal laws that have been given to us through about 100 different religions, just slightly differently, how can we know whether we actually need to be asking for something differently? What a beautiful thing. So faith, I want us to just consider as we move to the second part here, is I want us to consider that faith is actually the testing and the exploration of the divine will of God. Like cause and effect, like manifestation of your life, and realizing, wow, I might be responsible for this whole beautiful thing or for this whole mess. Yeah, exactly. Gigi sharing with us about her ability to have manifested her whole life. That is exactly it. It's easy when things are going well, but when there's illness and things like that involved, then we're not so willing to entertain it. But I don't want us just yet to have a conversation of, wow, a manifestation or creation, because really that's one of 7 cardinal laws that intertwine with each other. We are very obsessed in the modern day with one law. Guess what that is? The law of creation and attraction. You know why? Because we all want what we want. That's why we love that law. That's why it's one of the only laws that has made it into, I suppose, what I call New Age philosophy, is because, well, that makes sense to us. Okay, first of all, you can have faith in it because you can tell, wow, I can actually create what I want. But of course, you haven't been given the rest of the laws, and you haven't had the conversation of why cosmic law exists in the first place. So what you have is a lot of spiritual people running around trying to, without any integrity or understanding of other individuals, try to create what it is that they want, not realizing that one of the first things cosmic law teaches us is that once you get it, you'll understand that the things you really, truly want are the same things that will benefit everybody. So I don't want us to get too stuck on that law. We're just using that. So where does this leave you? You are at the moment possibly on the fence about this, or you're like, okay, I'm accepting there are some laws. So this is where most people, the average person that I speak to is, they'll be like, I believe that there are many laws of physics. I believe the physical world is completely bound to laws. And I believe that there are some things in the unseen world that seem to have a bit of law to them. That's where the average person is. And to truly find the power of this discussion would be to be willing to have the faith, to test the faith of actually the possibility that these laws are not slight, they are unwieldy, and that you can literally use them like 7 wands. So this is the choice. Do you choose chaos? And I don't mean chaos in your life. I mean, when you stand on a street corner and you watch a car accident and there's a dog walking and there's a boyfriend and a girlfriend kissing and there's a dove over there and there's an eagle at the top. And are you going to sit and go, this is chaos, and use words like luck and use words like providence, and or are you going to realize that you are a piece of a whole, and the whole, you are a piece of this perfect thing manifesting? So chaos is simply you misunderstanding what you are observing. Or a beautiful way to think of it is think of the ocean. I mean, if you sit on my beach up the road from my house during a storm, looks like the end of the world. That ocean is in perfect equilibrium. It just happens to be expressing that exact thing at that time. So these are the 2 paths that you go. The one is that you live a life of chaos, which means that you mostly don't take responsibility for the things that happen to you in your life. And that means that you do not take full ownership for your health and for your state of mind. And essentially, it is the opposite of cosmic law, is the path of nihilism. A lot of us know nihilists. We're so stuck in the physical laws. This is all there really is. And, and I mean, the first cosmic law is that we are literally on this incredible evolution. Like we are in the middle of divine radiant evolution. Just knowing that changes you forever. Just knowing that that's the law. Why? Well, because what I read now is with me for eternity. What I say to a person, my ethics, the way I behave, I could be 70 years old and be sitting in a library working on my understanding of the universe, because I know that the first law is that I am ever evolving, and it's magnificent. We're so disconnected to that law that we essentially think nothing matters. It doesn't matter if you improve yourself. It doesn't matter if you do another course. It doesn't matter if you find a deeper level of honesty with yourself. So you either are in the chaos side or you are in the perfect order side. It doesn't mean that you experience it as perfect order. It can feel like chaos all the time. one of the Hermetic texts of what we're speaking about of ancient Alexandria, says that life can only be understood backwards. That if you look at it backwards, you'll see it was never chaos. It was always perfect. And look at you now. And it'll be perfect one day again. So these are the possibilities we invite in. For an example, we mentioned astrology earlier. In astrology, and once again, you don't need to believe in astrology. I'm actually going to do a talk on astrology, and I'm convinced that by the time I'm done there, I think you're going to be quite surprised how your perception of astrology changes. I'm quite fascinated recently. Greg Braden, some of you know, he's a biologist, extraordinary guy. He's just done a series of talks where he's actually showed that just the planets that are in, he's a biologist, he's not even like the planets in certain alignments, how the cells actually begin to realign themselves. He's literally showing you under a microscope that the things around the mitochondrion and the way the cell responds does that at a certain time of the month when Mars is in a certain position. I mean, come on, this is a biologist. You know, like the fact that the moon is influencing the way everything around me mates. But I think that the other planets don't have an effect on me. So why do I bring up astrology so strongly? Because we have this idea of fate when we talk about cosmic law. Now, what fate is, and this is one of the oldest arguments that the oracles have been having thousands of years, I think even of ancient Greek mystical oracles, you know, like trying to speak into the wisdom of why things were happening. And so we have this whole kind of idea of fate. Is what's going to happen to me just going to happen to me? Do I have any say in how this happens? And this is such an age-old argument. And what we discover in cosmic law is that cosmic law essentially is going to treat you the same no matter what you do. If you put in a certain thing comes out. It's like the perfect formula. And what astrology shows us is that what fate is essentially that you can kick your toe against the same fridge 1,000 times if you want to. If every time that planet moves in and you don't want to learn that lesson and you want to allow that energy, which is just an archetype of the divine machine expressing, well, guess what? Then you essentially will be fated. In other words, you will always end up in the same situation. What we discover, why we use astrology and why we use, I use more psychotremetry and stuff like that, but any sort of archetypical system, why we use it is essentially so that we become aware of the different cosmic forces within us so that we learn to balance them and rise above them. An example is one of the great cosmic laws is the law of rhythm. And the law of essentially, we call it the pendulum, that your life, your emotions, your ability to make money, your ability to make friends, everything is swinging like this constantly. And the more that it swings, the more it's going to swing back the other way. So if you go to a rave and you party harder than you've ever partied in your life, and you are orgasmically, absolutely having the time of your life, the universe has got no opinion. Its laws are perfect, and it knows that its laws over thousands or millions of years are going to lead you to become exactly what it is you planned. And what happens? That Tuesday, it swings the other way, and suddenly you think it's a judgment or a punishment. You're feeling depressed. You're feeling down. No, a cosmic law is if you swing it one way, it will swing back. A mighty master or a magician, or what we call the initiates, are just people that barely swing it. So they look calm all the time. They walk around and we were like, geez, does life not affect those people? Well, they've learned one of the secret cosmic laws. They know, well, you know, I could get really excited and start running and shouting, but that also means I have to face the opposite side. So the reason I bring that up is quite simply because of the fact that once we can embrace these laws, we can rise above our fate. In other words, we start to express free will for the first time. It's quite an extraordinary thing. So in the closing part here, what I'd like to discuss with us is that it doesn't matter what religion I used now, We could use Christianity with the Holy Trinity. We could use we could use the Egyptians with the pyramid, but essentially the three. Now we're going to use Mahayana Buddhism just for a second, just to plug us into a closing idea here that will really set the stage for you about whether you're willing to perhaps really entertain these cosmic laws, because it doesn't help if you just read them. You've got to literally be willing to go, okay, that's a law. And if I lean into that law, then essentially it's going to respond 100% to me. So there's this idea in Mahayana Buddhism. We'll talk specifically about Gautama Buddha. And I mean, Buddha, essentially, there were many Buddhas, but he rose at a certain time. And from that body of teachings, which we now know has also mixed with a lot of the other religions we didn't know about, like the ancient Greeks, we become aware of the fact that they had this Trinity idea. And the idea is quite simply, you've got three bodies, and you'll understand the relevance of this now. Your first body is your physical body. It's your lower body. It's whatever you want to call. It's this magnificent thing that allows you to experience things in real time, to experience the culmination of your decisions, to experience in the impossible array of possibilities that you could have had. You choose certain things and they collapse like a wave function into physicality. And essentially all that means is this is the part of all reality you're getting to experience physically. Wow, okay, cool. So we've got this physical body. But then the second body that you've got is the Sambodha body. And the Sambodha, I'm not sure how to pronounce it, Sambodha. This body is essentially your second body. And I want you to imagine that we're all one big circle and that there's lots of little circles and we're all connected by a second circle. And all that basically means is we're all single being, but we get to express individually, and we all have a middleman helping us connect the whole thing together. Do you know who agrees with this? Nearly every New Ager. They don't know where it comes from, but they say there's your higher self, these concepts are not new. These concepts have been going on for thousands and thousands of years. Even if you get the idea in Christianity that Jesus Christ became the middleman, it's the exact same idea. There's that your separate lower body is not too sure what's going on with the law. Then you have your unwielding divine power cell, or whatever you want to call it. Language is so limiting that can connect you to the highest body, which is your Dhammakaya. And your Dhammakaya, if you translate it, is the law, which does not mean the boss. It means the perfect balanced system of, it's called the body of law, sorry. So the three bodies are the body, imagine I was one of these bodhisattvas, Buddhas, whatever, sitting there. Then if you see in all their photos, they have this beautiful colors and light coming off. That essentially means that essentially all your intentions, your thoughts, your feelings, your ideas create a second body, which is an expression of where all the possibilities of you exist. And that is the part of us that most of us are working on when we study or when we do introspection work or when we pray. And why this is important is that that body is constantly able to pull us into an equilibrium at any stage. So it actually takes quite an enormous amount of resistance to not allow ourselves to be pulled back in to alignment once we, I suppose you could say, bow down to cosmic law. And then the third body would be when you connect to the whole of what we are. It's just perfect law. Why this is so interesting is that what the Buddhists explained, and nearly all mystery schools explained, is that we almost can't explain the perfect essence that exists within these bodies, but we can create symbols for them. And those symbols almost represent something that we can reach out to. They say in our psyche, even in Buddhism, and many of you know this in Masonic temples, and that certain symbols represent energy packets and that it activates certain things within us. And that is why the world of symbolism and religion are so powerfully intertwined. Is, for instance, when you hold your cross or when you hold your Buddha, It doesn't necessarily mean that you are worshiping that thing. It means that in your understanding of cosmic law, in your understanding of this great, absolutely perfect thing you are part of, that represents the type of individual that you want to reach towards, that you want to become entangled with, that you want to be inspired by. And that is a powerful conversation to go down one day about how symbolism actually works and why everything is symbolism. In Mahayana Buddhism, Dhammakaya bodies are held, Sambodha bodies are held by anything, even an organization. Just contemplate this for a second. If you opened up a studio, it would get a Sambodha body. It means unseen. It just means that if there's something physical that has some form of intent or is doing actions, like for instance, if I wave my hand, there's wind. That would almost be the Sambodha body of my action. But imagine you owned a yoga studio, and every time you decided how you treat people, you decided what your intention to be there, is it money driven? It's creating this aurical, beautiful Sambodha body around that. And what's so absolutely magnificent about this is that these things can be used in symbols. And when you begin to understand what symbolism really is, it is as a way to basically contact these cosmic laws, which are never-ending fountains and rivers of divine inspiration for us, using a symbol. And it makes you realize that you are actually not naive to hold your cross tight when you say your earnest prayer for strength. So where that essentially leaves us in this conversation is there are 7. We're not doing them this evening, we're done now, but there are essentially 7 core laws. We don't know this for a fact. This is via so many different texts. Some disagree slightly with them, and the deeper you go down them, the more interesting you get. None of them contradict each other, and they are all essentially one in the same. And to understand them is a lifetime's work, but something that even the first time you go across it, it wields an almost uncanny feeling of nervousness, responsibility, excitement, but logic within you, such as when I just explained to you that one of the laws are the laws of the pendulum. All things swing. Many of you know laws of polarity. Many of you know the laws of cause and effect, the laws of rhythm. And when you understand them together, you can have a completely different experience of reality. Or we can choose to take a path of nihilism, or we can choose to take a path where we believe that this is all essentially some form of chaos. I think as a closing thought, if you really backing to get your head around this idea of cosmic law, why am I spending so much time almost trying to convince you that you need to really read them carefully instead of just reading them to you, is because you as a human being know, have you ever picked up a book where you really believe there's something very special about it and you can immediately unfold the deep wisdom in it? We bring half of the power to something. And that's important to realize. So I want you to consider a really strange conversation. Let's talk about parenthood. Essentially, if you think about a parent, what a parent is doing is is essentially going, well, there's certain disciplines and certain, let's call it cause and effect, or there's certain reactions, or there's certain boundaries that you as a parent are trying to keep together for your child because you know a lot better for them. Not just as in your plan, but knowing how it will turn out for them. We live in an age where many people will tell you that people essentially get to a certain age, 20s, that they get angry with their parents because they're like, why didn't you discipline me? I can't deal with life. I can't work for things. I don't really understand how things work. And we're in a victimized society because we decided not to discipline. And I'm being triggering on purpose. So where law would come in, and this is just an analogy for us to try and hack this idea, where law would come in is that a parent, although it's difficult, and although there's tantrums, and although the child is suffering, in the child's views, it is the end of the world. And you wish you could just tell that child, this is for your good. This is what you want. This is not what I want. This is what you have always planned. This is why you were born. You are going to become something more magnificent than you can comprehend. A grain of sand on the beach through cosmic law becomes a galaxy. So what do? You enforce those laws. And a good parent, I'm not a parent, so I'm talking in a context of cosmic law, and a parent holds those laws. And good laws are not negotiable. It's only man that negotiates law, that thinks that if they have a good relationship with Jesus or with Buddha, that they'll be the only person that will be an exception to a law that is so perfect that it cannot be perfected, it cannot be improved upon. So what would you do? You'd hold the law for that child, and that child would have great difficulties. And later on, that child will bloom when it begins to essentially create its own versions of reality and life. But just think of that role, that gift that you've given that being, that you haven't told them what to be. You've literally showed them the ways that you can expand in unison with all things. And I think it's just such a magnificent analogy to think about. So if you find yourself in prayer feeling like you're sitting at a set of laws that are telling you what to do, it could not be further from the truth. It is like, this is what you truly desire. And if you ask for guidance, it will be shown to you why this is what you do and what you desire and what it is you're becoming. I couldn't even begin to imagine. So where that leaves us is I will be doing a second talk on Thursday. I don't really need anyone to necessarily make it. I will not be going live, but I will release a link for anyone who wants to join, and it will be on my interpretation in about 45 minutes of the 7 core laws that you need. After that, you can have such fun because you can go and read the Babylonian interpretation, the Egyptian interpretation. There's slight differences. It gets really exciting. But on the whole, it's going to poison you in such an exciting way that you're going to walk around realizing that you're having a part in absolutely everything that's happening to you. It's so exciting in some ways. And that's on Thursday, which is just in 2 days' time. So I will place that on my page. But as I said, I feel no need to really enroll for it. I was going to have this discussion to see if, because of course, even in your own way, you're going to be exploring and reading. And the other thing that's going to be important about Thursday is we're going to talk about the 7 cosmic laws, the way that they were. And then we're going to look at our modern interpretation, and you're going to discover that we've been a little bit selfish and convenient in these laws. Some of them, especially like our interpretation of how we create reality and things like that, but that we're on the mark, and that a lot of this wisdom has permeated through. And I find that really exciting, and it leaves me lying in bed at night wondering how we knew this stuff, and how it is that we're in this modern era where we have flying cars, and yes, we have them now, and we don't have a clue what's going on. We have literally, as some people saying, split religion and science right down the middle. And it was the biggest mistake we ever made in our lives, because for, I think, hundreds of thousands of years, we only have a track of about 40,000. I believe that the unseen and the seen were treated as one, the inner and the outer. Even right now, the only reason I exist, and this is how I know that, for instance, Hannah is part of me. The only reason I exist is because I can tell what I think I am against what I think she is. In other words, if she wasn't on the outer, I couldn't be on the inner. These are all cosmic laws. It's like so mind-blowing that you'll walk around confused for days. But I love it. And essentially, it makes me wonder whether we're ever going to get to a point where we will have people that lead again, that are as above, so below. Cosmic laws are wielding both these powers. If we were back in ancient Egypt right now, and you wanted to learn these cosmic laws, probably none of us would be invited in. Pythagoras, it is said, took 11 years before they allowed him into the mystery schools. And he changed the world with what he learned, right? And a lot of people are like, yeah, but he only did physical laws of mathematics. That's not true. Go read what he wrote. Most of it is about God. So it's an extraordinary subject, and I hope it's excited you. And I've tried to cover quite a lot of it really quickly. And I just want, sure, that's a very interesting question. I'll get to you now, Madeleine. So I'm just going to end this recording.